we go. All right. Awesome. All right, people are coming in. Hi guys, we're just going to give everyone a second to enter Zoom. It can take a few minutes for everyone to get here, and I think we have a very healthy crowd, which is great. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday. Awesome, people are getting in. Okay, cool. All right, I'm just going to let more people come in because I don't want them to miss anything, but we'll get started in just a minute. Awesome. Hello, welcome, welcome. Okay. All right, I'm sure more people will be entering as I give my intro, but that's all right. We'll just go ahead and get started and people can enter as they come in. Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Kerfoot. I am the Director of Events at Politics and Prose Bookstore in Washington, D.C., and I'd like to welcome you all to today's virtual event. Before we begin, I want to thank all of the amazing independent bookstores who have partnered with us on this event, many of which are in one of the 6 states that appear in the book. So there's Books and Books in Florida, Midtown Scholar in Pennsylvania, Harvard Bookstore in Massachusetts, Acapella Books in Georgia, Literati Bookstore in Michigan, and Changing Hands in Arizona. Thank you all for being with us and joining and supporting independent bookstores. It is so important now more than ever. And so we're so glad to have 7 incredible indies from around the country supporting this event and this book. Also, I will be dropping links in the chat if you didn't purchase a book with your ticket, where you can purchase a copy of The Steal from one of the 7 bookstores. You can select shipping for anywhere within the United States. And if you already purchased a book with your ticket, we will be shipping those out very soon. The snow over in the East Coast has slowed things down, so just bear with us on that one. Also, if you have a question for the authors, please submit it in the Q&A space, and we'll get to those questions in the latter portion of the program. You can submit your questions at any point between now and the end of the event. So if you've got something to ask, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Okay, now on to the actual program. As we just witnessed the 1-year anniversary of the insurrection at the US Capitol right here in DC, mere blocks from where I am sitting and talking to you right now, this book could not be more timely. Mark Bowden and Matthew Teague are seasoned writers and journalists who have joined forces on The Steal, a week-by-week, state-by-state account of the effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Working with a team of researchers and reporters, the authors uncovered never-before-told accounts from the election officials fighting to do their jobs amid outlandish claims and threats to themselves, their colleagues, and their families. Moderating the conversation is Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, responsible for reporting on President Biden, the 5th president he has covered. He is also the co-author, most recently, of the best-selling book, The Man Who Ran Washington, The Life and Times of James A. Baker II, along with Susan Glasser. Thank you again for joining us, and now I will turn this event over to our speakers.
Hey everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here with Mark and Matt, and I'm excited that you all are tuning in. This is a great opportunity to talk about this fantastic new book. And as Brittany just said, these bookstores are all, these are your bookstores, guys. Help support them, because this is what is keeping, great work like this alive. And make sure you order one of these books. In fact, if you haven't already, order it again, maybe 2 or 3. It's a great gift. You should give it to your parents, give it to your uncles and aunts, give it to the member of your family who disagrees with you politically, because I'd be interested to see what conversations you have as a result of it. You don't need a introduction to Mark and Matt, but I'm going to give you one anyway. Mark Bowden, of course, is the world famous author of so many amazing books, not least of which, of course, was Black Hawk Down, but so many others along the way, including Killing Pablo, Way 1968, about the Vietnam battle. It wrote about the killing of Osama bin Laden. One of my favorites that doesn't get as much attention, but is so fantastic, is his book on the Iran hostage crisis. Went back and reconstructed that. Mark Bowden is not only a friend, but a role model for people like me who have for years admired his work. And he's also a really great guy to spend a trip with on an airplane to a long far off place, which we did a few years back with a person who now happens to be president of the United States. Matthew Teague is a fellow writer at The Atlantic, works at the same place as Mark Bowden, and is working for a number of other magazines, written for Esquire, written for National Geographic. Really interestingly, was executive producer of Our Friend, which premiered just last year. It's hard to imagine 2021 is last year, but he's been very busy in the pandemic. He's not letting anything slow him down. I want to ask you a little bit about how you guys wrote this book together, but before we do that, tell us what is the point of this book? Because we've had a lot of books so far about Trump and the end and January 6th. And while Trump's name is in this book and he appears in this book, it's not even really a book about Trump, right? It's what's really fascinating, that what distinguishes this book is it's about the people you've never heard of who really, in a lot of ways, saved the democratic system about a year ago. Tell us, start with Mark, and then we'll go to Matt. Tell us a little bit about what this book tells us.
Well, what it does, Peter, and thank you for that very generous introduction. The book that we wrote was deliberately zigging while other people zagged, as we used to say at the Philadelphia Inquirer. We knew that there'd be a tremendous amount of reportorial and investigative attention devoted to what happened in Washington on January 6th and in and around Trump's inner circle. In fact, I think everybody who worked for him is now writing a book, if it's not been published already. So we decided to actually look at what we felt was the real threat to the American system, which was the concerted effort that was launched by the Trump campaign in the 6 swing states around the country. So we wanted to understand, who were the people in those states who were agitating and working and suing to try to overturn the election results, and who were the people on the front lines of that fight? Who were the local election officials, the state legislators, the judges who had to deal with these, dozens and scores of complaints and allegations about the election. So we're happy we did it this way, because we feel that this is actually a more important story, although the other one is pretty darn important too.
So Matt, tell us a little about that, because we just saw the anniversary of January 6th last week, but it feels like a lot of attention rightly is focused on the violence that day, but it didn't start that day, right? What your book, I think, helps us understand is how we got to that day.
That's something we noticed fairly early on, was that I think there's sort of 2 modes of thinking about January 6th that have emerged, and I think they're neither one quite on the mark. And one is to ignore it and turn away from the day and the events of the day and sort of pretend like it wasn't that big a deal. But the other is to, on the other side, people fixating on that day and viewing the details of the day minute by minute in isolation. And so what we wanted to do is give the context and the run up to it. Why did this happen? How did we get to this place? Which is a different question and carries on even though January 6th, the anniversary, is come and gone.
You have so many interesting characters in here, real people whose names mostly, I think, are probably not recognizable to the average public, but maybe should be, right? People in Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, who were standing up to do what they thought was the right thing to preserve an election despite this extraordinary pressure. What's interesting in some ways to me is that the people who are most captivating aren't Democrats, who you would expect to defend an election that they believe that they won, not believe that they won, they did win. But the Republicans who went against all of this pressure that was on them. Mark, tell us about that a little bit, about the Republicans who had to stand up against their own party, including some who voted for and actually genuinely supported Trump.
That's right. Well, I think that, the one thing you have to understand is how decentralized the American election system is. And so in Republican counties and Republican states, the election is run by Republicans. So you had Clint Hickman, who I think is watching us tonight, who was the president of the Board of Supervisors for Maricopa County, Arizona, which is basically Phoenix, Arizona and environs. And he was responsible for running that election. So as surprised as he was on election night that his county went for Joe Biden, he was even more shocked a couple hours later when Donald Trump, the candidate he had supported, came on TV and said that the election specifically in Maricopa County was fraudulent. Well, he was the guy who ran the election. So that put him in a really sort of interesting spot. And what Clint did is I think he decided, well, I'm going to tell the truth and I'm going to stand up for my own integrity and the integrity of the people who work for and around me and tell people what actually happened. And he took a tremendous amount of grief and pressure for being honest.
So Matt, these Republicans like Clint Hickman, and if he is on the call tonight or this event tonight, please send us a question on the Q&A chat. You don't have to be Clint Hickman to send us a question on the Q&A chat. Anybody else who has a question, please feel free to put it in there as well. We'll get to as many as we can. So Matt, what do people like Clint and the other Republicans who believed in Trump and felt he was doing the right thing for the country and a good president in a lot of ways, or at least a better president in their view than the Democrats would be, what did this do to their faith, do you think, in him and in their party? Does that kind of event challenge your foundational? I mean, one of your characters, I'm now going to forget his name, was Mr. Republican, right? I mean, these people are not fly by night, Republicans. They're deeply committed people. Matt, how did that affect their beliefs and their foundational faith in their party?
I think the thing that distinguished them in large part from the people who were marching on the Capitol and believing these conspiracy theories and things is that they were participating in the process, that they had the information, they had the facts, they were volunteering at the sites, they were working, as election observers, things like that. And so they had the information before then. So that when the disinformation started to roll in from Washington, they were able to say, hold on, this does not line up with what I've seen so far. And I think that has to be disillusioning to see the person that heads your party and whom within just hours ago you voted for even, now saying something that you know not to be true. And I have had several people say, for instance, that they won't run for re-election in the offices where they've held, just because the whole process seems sort of scalding in a way. And so I don't know that they're shifting to become Democrats or anything like that, but I think they are removing themselves, sadly, from the process in some places.
Which may actually have the unwelcome event of making this an even more fraught system in future elections, right? If you take out the people who believed in the system over party and only leave the people who believe in party over system, the outcome could be very different next time. I mean, that's, Mark, your subtitle talks about the people who stopped the steal. That's the title, the phrase people who stopped it. But you also interviewed a number of the people on the other side, right? You talk to people who fervently believe that the election was stolen, even though there's no evidence for it whatsoever, like Greg Stenstrom and Leah Hoops and Marco Trikovic and so forth. Tell us a little bit about them and what did you expect when you went to interview with them or when you did interview them, and what surprised you when you talked with them?
Well, I definitely wanted to tell this story from both sides. I mean, this was a struggle. And we had a wonderful researcher woman named Alice Lloyd, and I had asked Alice to find me some of the key people in each of these 6 swing states who are on both sides of this battle. So that's where, I first targeted people like Leah Hoops and Greg Stenstrom or Marco Trikovic. And, both Leah and Greg Stenstrom were kind enough to answer my questions and speak to me at length. And as I am anytime, Peter, that I write a story, I'm genuinely interested in trying to understand, the participants in the story, the people who are in the middle of it. So my goal in talking to them was to elicit from them their way of thinking. And, in fact, I told them that you may not in the end like the book, but I guarantee you that I will portray you the way you are and why you did what you did. And I think, I'm not really that surprised by it, but I was certainly struck by the fact that someone like Leah, somebody like Greg Stenstrom, they really believe the stories that they told. They are convinced, that they witnessed something untoward. And even though they haven't been able to prove it, I don't think they've changed their minds. So my goal was to try to explain their thinking and why they thought the way they did and why they've done the things they've done.
Well, one of the things that's, I think you've done a fantastic job, both of you, in this book, is treating them with respect, but also trying to help us understand, people who might not see it the same way, understand how it is that they came to the beliefs that they have, which is, I think, so important to understand in this moment in our history. Matt, were you surprised by some of this, and do you think that this is different than in the past, or have they just gotten more of an amplification than they might have had? People maybe always doubted elections, but they've now been amplified because they had a sitting president of the United States telling them this is the truth, and having the social media and regular media outlets to spread that conspiracy theory further than it might have otherwise gone.
Yeah, I think that is the difference from the past. I mean, the conspiracy theorists have always been with us and always will be, but they had a media, this time had media, social media. They had amplification with Hannity, with Carlson, these guys, with enormous audiences, and as you mentioned, with the president himself, sort of advancing some of these things, specifically picking on election workers by name in Georgia, things like that. The most powerful man in the world. It's really remarkable thing that was facilitated, I think, by the internet. And I know there's a fairly long section of the book devoted to the history of this sort of thing, and this is something new that's happening now.
Yeah. Mark, tell us about Rudy Giuliani, who I think is one of the most fascinating characters in this story. Of course, a lot of Americans remember him from 9/11, America's mayor, all that kind of thing. But by the time the Trump era comes, he is trafficking in so many wild, sometimes absurd conspiracy theories. And here he is in this post-election period with the hair dye coming down his cheek in front of Four Seasons Total Landscaping, and they've got this, what you guys call the blunderbuss strategy. Tell us a little bit about tell us your take on Rudy Giuliani and his role in this, and what the blunderbuss strategy is.
Well, as far as Rudy Giuliani is concerned, I think a lot of people like me who have met him in the past wonder what happened to him. The effort that he led to file 61 lawsuits in states all over the country, all of which failed, was the most amateurish, slapdash effort imaginable. And it kind of makes you wonder, what the story would have been like if they'd had, more competent legal representation. He employed what I call the blunderbuss strategy. The blunderbuss, as the name implies, is a colonial era weapon, which is very inaccurate, but which fires or blasts a lot of shot. And so basically what Giuliani would do is solicit anybody's notions about what might have been wrong about the election. Everything from someone who showed up to vote who they felt they were treated rudely by an election worker, to somebody like Greg Stenstrom, who has a theory that half of the votes in Delaware County, Pennsylvania were printed up for Biden in advance and inserted into the count. So, I mean, some of these stories that he grasped are either so silly or so easy to disprove that the only way to think of it is that they weren't actually interested in winning any of these arguments. They're only interested in throwing out so many allegations of fraud that even a reasonable person would begin to think, well, maybe there was something wrong with that election because there's so many complaints about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think that's right. For those who are watching, go to your chat function and you'll find links to all the various independent bookstores that are carrying this book. Make sure to order it before we're done here. And if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A function, and we'll get to them in a few minutes. So Matt, to that point, to Mark's point, there were so many theories out there, right? Everything from Dominion voting to the burst water pipe, which you guys explore in Fulton County, and the misapplied votes in, I'm forgetting the name of the county in Michigan, where this poor clerk got it wrong, quickly fixed it, admitted she got it wrong, and still managed to find herself on the receiving end of all kinds of crap. Was there, Matt, as you went through it, I mean, was there ever a moment you thought, well, maybe there's something here? I mean, like, was anything persuasive to you, or how, how many threads did you have to pull to realize that at least most of these, if not all of these, were just there's no there.
Well, one of the first things that we did in organizing the book was to set forward a chronology and just start at the beginning from the dawn of time, basically, go through voter fraud and then into 2020 and every instance that we could find, every allegation that we could find. And Mark and I kept talking to each other, have you found anything credible? Because we would have really explored that. And again, the answer was just no. You would sort of poke gently. It didn't even require any deep investigation on our part. Just sort of poke gently at a thing and it would all just fall apart into nothing. Because as Mark said, the point was not to persuade. It was just to overwhelm, just through sheer volume.
Well, so
and if
Mark,
I could answer
yeah.
Peter quickly, we did look at these allegations. I mean, there's Sharpiegate, where Marko Trkovic claimed that the county election workers were handing out Sharpies because the machines wouldn't register ballots marked with Sharpies. It turned out the opposite was true, that actually Sharpies work better than ballpoint pens. And in Delaware County, I mean, I should make this point because I think it's not made often enough, but anywhere where anyone tried to insert hundreds of thousands of fake ballots would be so immediately and glaringly apparent in the election data that it would send up a red flag that, like those 3,000 votes that got switched in Antrim County, Michigan, sent an alarm not just around America, but all over the world. I mean, the whole world noticed because 3,000 votes had gone into the wrong column. So you can imagine in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where there are only 300,000 votes to be had, if 150,000 fake ballots were inserted, the entire, election data picture for Delaware County would immediately reflect that something had gone really wrong.
Right. I think that's an excellent point. One thing that's really interesting too is you talk to Republicans who don't buy into the theory that something was stolen, will often say, well, there was some irregularities or there's some concerns didn't add up to changing the outcome, but I'm really concerned because perhaps they just feel like they need to have at least a nod to that. But what about that, Matt? I mean, there are sort of two issues here, right? There's the issue of, was there fraud? Were ballots stolen? Dead people voting, machine totals changed. And then there's a question which seems a little different, which is, okay, I don't like the policy that was put in place because of the pandemic, that they were relying on mail-in ballots that are sent to people who didn't ask for them, for instance, and we're not requiring signatures the way we might have required them in the past, or we're allowing votes to come in after election day because as long as they were mailed by the right day. These are policy questions rather than somebody, outright thievery, which is what Trump always implies. Mm-hmm. Matt, did you find that is there a reasonable debate about any of these at this point, or are those also smokescreens?
Oh, they're certainly smokescreens. I don't think I've seen any example of a policy put in place, COVID or otherwise, that was intended to hold back one party or the other. But that said, I do think that what you're describing is an opportunity for us. There may be questions people ask, as I've heard otherwise, what do we do about this in the future? I think transparency is always a good thing. Whether it's at your local level, understanding the way the vote works, it's different in every state, sometimes at the county level, all the way up to like, what is the U.S. Congress's role in certifying this? Is it ceremonial? Is it actually functional? So I think there could be more clarity and transparency in the process, but I don't think there was any shenanigans in that way.
Mark, we talk about the institutions held. That's a phrase you hear a lot. The institutions held. In the end, the 61 lawsuits were all dismissed. Even Supreme Court justices that President Trump appointed said, no thanks, we're not getting involved here. There's nothing here that we feel is untoward. Republican governors like Kemp and Ducey, Republican election officials like Raffensperger, they all withstood the pressure. But it seems to me when we say the institutions work, that obviates the point that they came very close, right? That it didn't, had you put people in those slots who didn't have the backbone or the principle or whatever phrase you want to use to say, no, there's no there. And in fact, we're more, Trumpian in their political outlooks or something like that, which is something that people think is being arranged right now through some of these new laws. that maybe it could have gone another way. I mean, Mark, did you ever come to a conclusion like that? Could it have gone another way? I mean, how close do you think we came?
I think we actually didn't come all that close, but I don't want to minimize the threat. As I said earlier, I think if this threat had been less slapdash and a little bit more professional, it could have had really much more damaging consequences than it did. But I came away really from researching this book more optimistic than I was when I went in, because, I find, and Matt alluded to this earlier, when people are directly involved in the process, when they're the ones with their neighbors who are collecting the votes and counting the votes and turning them in, it would take a fairly deeply dishonest person in that context to falsify, the elections that had come in. And frankly, I don't think the American people are as dishonest as Donald Trump wanted them to be.
Okay, an optimist. I like that. Matt, are you optimistic after doing the book?
Yeah, I think so, cautiously, because we went into this, I genuinely thought, beginning the research, that I would find this to be a clean red-blue divide. And then as I got further into it, I realized that it wasn't that many of the people who acted heroically in the book were Republicans and even Trump supporters. And so it wasn't red versus blue, it was truth versus lies. And that's a line that's drawn through every American's heart, and we can all choose to tell the truth or tell a lie. And when you have the information in hand, I do think that most people want to tell the truth.
Well, then, Mark, I guess the question then becomes, what about these changes that some states are putting into place for 2022 and 2024? In other words, in some places there is a feeling that, well, these election boards or secretaries of state or whatever have too much independence. They need to be more answerable to, another political entity. Do you think that is something that is of concern, and could that conceivably change an election outcome?
It sure could, and I think it's a very dangerous thing, far more dangerous than trying to put people in on local election boards to somehow, alter the vote count. I think where we need to focus our efforts on protecting democracy is in ensuring that the actual vote is the one that gets certified. And you saw the efforts being made in the 6 swing states to basically have state legislators assert themselves and say that, don't worry about that vote count over there. We say these are the electors who are going to go to Washington. And I think if that develops, and there's real efforts to make that happen around the country, that is a real threat to democracy, and I think needs to be resisted. And the other thing I would say is that the fact that people who volunteer to work on elections, or who are paid very minimal salaries, or even people who are in very minor elected positions that supervise these elections, traditionally these have been positions that are sort of boring, but they're respected and honored for their service to the community. In 2020, these people were attacked. And so I think that we need to protect the people who are working on our elections from the kind of, merciless threats that came at Ruby Freeman in Georgia, so she had to go into hiding. Clinton Hickman had demonstrators on his front lawn of his house in his neighborhood trying to pressure him. I think we as a country need to step up and do a better job of protecting the people who are running the vote for us.
Yeah, I think those stories are well told in your book and mostly not known by the public, just how much good-hearted, public-spirited citizens who put themselves forward to these thankless jobs suddenly were under enormous pressure, enormous threat. Matt, how close do you think we came to violence before January 6th? I mean, we always spoke on January 6th. I mean, could there have been violence before then?
Oh yeah, and I believe there was some sort of violent preamble in riots in Arizona, and I believe in Georgia as well. There were people accosting some of the people we wrote about. Ruby Freeman in particular. One of the things that we found out in reporting the book was that bizarrely, a publicist who works in some capacity for Kanye West showed up at Ms. Freeman's house late at night, knocking on her door, sort of threatening her with, insider knowledge of indictments. There was just an enormous amount of pressure, and even international interference. According to the FBI, the Iranians were at work and targeting people online. So yeah, there was a real threat. And then we did see the eruption on January 6th. And I wish I knew, or had a better answer as to whether we'll see more of it. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if we did.
So Mark, tell us a little bit about the writing of this book. You've written more than a dozen previous books, and yet here we are in a pandemic. And we were talking offline before we started. You and Matt not only did not meet during this book, you've never met in person. Is that right?
That's right. Thanks to the COVID.
I've always avoided him. He's wanting to meet. I say no.
He doesn't look safe, Matt. I think you've made the right choice.
This
Mark,
was
tell us how you got started.
Our publisher, Morgan Entrican, called me in the spring of last year, and he said, he felt it was really important to try to document what had happened in 2020, that it was unprecedented and historic, and he was not terribly confident that the Congress at that point was going to conduct the kind of serious investigation that I think the country needed. So he asked me, and I told him in a nutshell, well, that's huge. You obviously want this done quickly. We would need reporting all over the country. There's no way I can do this by myself. So if you're willing to hire people to help me to work as researchers and reporters, I'll try to steer them, and I will volunteer to write it at the end. And in the end, I ended up doing a bit of reporting myself. And Matt was initially brought on, as he said, to manage the team of reporters and researchers, but he kept sending me these beautifully written memos. And I'm thinking, why am I, walking down this road by myself? I mean, this guy can write. So I called him and said, Matt, we should co-author this book. So it's the first book I've ever written where I had help. And I must say, I really enjoyed it. All of the people who worked with us did a terrific job. We're very proud of the way it worked out. And we did it in about 5 months, which is, I think, pretty remarkable.
So Matt, I've written a couple books with my wife, but we live in the same place, which that makes, interaction and so forth easier. I mean, what was it like doing this only apparently through Zoom?
Is it easier though, Peter? That sounds a lot harder. I think if Mark and I were living together, I'm not sure it would have gone as smoothly as it did. No, it worked really well. Morgan, the publisher, was very generous with his time. He met with us weekly, and Mark and I talked daily as we sort of went back and forth. We would each write a state. We assigned ourselves states and then pass it back and forth. And it went really well. I've never, I'm not a researcher, so I really just signed on because I was interested in the project. But I had never written anything with a partner before, and I couldn't have chosen a better, or I couldn't have been chosen for a better opportunity. I was really grateful to be part of it.
Well, Mark, how did you get it done so fast? Because I mean, you're known for your meticulous reconstructions and finely honed details, and yet you only had 5 months, and that's just even with two of you, that had to be incredibly challenging. What was the hardest part of that?
Well, I think that it helped that we made some conceptual decisions very early on that we were going to find people, and we were going to write about people. We were going to tell their stories. And so then, we relied on Alice Lloyd and Jordan Howell and Grace Bartlett and Joanna Arcieri and Alan Entrican to help us find the people that we wanted to write about. And I worked very closely with Alice, who just did amazing work. And, she would send me notes about certain characters, and I would say, okay, I want to know what color his shirt was, when he was in that meeting. And I want these kinds of questions asked. And she just took the ball and ran with it and just did a fantastic job. In fact, at one point I said to Alice, I'm sorry, Matt, do you want to help write this book, Alice? And Alice said, no, she didn't. So we don't have 3 authors on it, but we couldn't have done it without their help. And I think that, the hardest part really was just, I think, getting started and figuring out exactly what needed to be done, how to do it. Once the material started rolling in, it was so rich and so interesting. It really was not a huge challenge to write it.
So then, Matt, were you able to meet with any of the people who are subject, or did you do them all through phone and Zoom? I mean, it's harder as a reporter, right? As a writer, we all know that it's easier to make a connection with somebody in person, but it obviously hasn't been so easy. What was that like?
Yeah, the best I could do was to go visit the bathroom that's detailed in the opening chapter and see where that all went down. But other than that, just it was the very hottest part of the pandemic, really difficult, and so we didn't end up meeting the people. Hopefully, we will in the future.
We should let everybody know that the bathroom you're talking about is the bathroom in Fulton County where the pipe burst issue, which Trump then made into a great big conspiracy theory that was somehow part of an elaborate plan to steal the election.
Right.
Read about it in the book. You'll find it well funny if it weren't so tragic, right? But that's
no. I want to add one thing. One of the things that helped enormously was social media. As terrible as social media is, in my opinion, what you can do is you can dial it back to a certain day in 2020. So I could look up what people were posting and writing in the moment.
Yes.
Back then, and that was extremely helpful in giving me a sense of what they were thinking at the time, what they were doing at the time. And then, I have gotten to know a few of the folks that we wrote about on the phone and through emails and texts and whatnot. And, you get actually to be friends with folks that way.
Well, we've all adjusted our relationships with other human beings in the last 2 years in a way that Zoom is more intimate than it might have been otherwise, I suppose. We're going to open up to the questions now. Keep in mind, if you go to the chat function, you can click on one of the links to buy the book. Don't forget, put your questions in the Q&A queue, and we'll get to them right now. We have one here that says Jennifer Hickman, but I'm wondering whether that's Clint Hickman, but the message says, "Gentlemen, it is a high honor to appear in this book. Speaking the truth is an easy and comfortable place to reside. My parents have always told me being honest might hurt you in the short term, but honesty and integrity is a great long-term vocation. Thanks to Alice Lloyd, your researcher, I know I was treated fairly and was able to tell Maricopa County's story." If one of you wants to say anything about that or to him.
Yeah, Clint was just great, and he was very helpful in telling his story and explaining, why he felt the way he did, why he did what he did. But I think you can't overestimate how important someone like Clint Hickman was in 2020. He did the right thing when it was hard to do the right thing, and he took a lot of crap for it. And I think he deserves to be. This is, in a way, it's kind of like a profiles in courage, this book. I mean, we found people who I think deserve to be recognized and honored. So Clint, thanks.
Well, I think they just had a streaming 4-hour thing yesterday, in fact, where they deconstructed the cyber ninjas report about their election, showing how even the things that were brought up in that audit, which actually did reaffirm the election result, were not well founded. So
let me just say, Peter, if I can say, Clint pointed out something interesting to me there. After the cyber ninjas failed to find what they clearly had been set up to find, Clint made the point that these folks had to go out and hire real Arizonans to go in and actually count the ballots. And real people, he felt, could sense the importance of holding someone's ballot in their hands. And in the end, they were honest about what happened. So it just reinforces the point I tried to make earlier that, if we're counting on somebody convincing large numbers of Americans to falsify election results, I think we probably don't have that much to worry
about. Matt, this is from Marin, I'm going to mispronounce it, Shokir, who writes, given what Mark Bowden said about, quote, basically honest people, following up what you just said, can you speak to what you think happened in Congress, where many politicians refused to certify results in the face of no evidence of widespread fraud? Matt, do you have a feeling on that?
Yeah,
I realize you didn't report on that per se.
Yeah, we didn't go into that particular aspect, but I think there is an answer here. It's the famous question that dates back to Roman times, is the question of who benefits. And so I think when you're looking at everyday Americans who are casting ballots and sort of volunteering their time, things like that, they are motivated largely to tell the truth because the system benefits them that way. I think some of the people that you're describing in Congress who refuse to certify the vote benefit from not doing so. I think if you look at them, it's pretty clear why they would act the way they did.
I'm going to read one for Mark from Daniel Riley. What proportion of the people advocating the steal are true believers, and what proportion are knowingly perpetrating falsehoods in bad faith? Which is an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a demographic survey, but my hunch is that 80 to 90% of the people who were making these allegations really believed they were true. I think it's only really at the top where I'm certain that a lot of the people around Donald Trump who were fostering, this effort and who were collecting all these cockamamie allegations they had to have known that these things were false. These are people who have experience in elections. They know how elections are run. So I think it was very cynical on their part. But having said that, I actually think Donald Trump probably does believe what he says, because I think he has basically made a career out of believing what he chooses to believe, and thinking that the truth is the thing that helps him the most. So I think when he says that it was stolen, I think he really believes it was.
That's interesting because, my wife and I, Susan Grosser and I, are writing a book about Trump and the Trump presidency. And we have this debate all the time, actually. It's, to what extent does he believe this is true and how much does he know it's not? And it's a hard one. It really is, because, obviously there's no evidence for it. And anybody watching, should know that a lot of people looked at this. I mean, there's literally not a single independent authority, not one independent authority, not a judge, not a prosecutor, not an election official, not a governor, not a media organization, a neutral media organization, or even a partisan one for that matter, that has found any kind of widespread fraud that would have changed the outcome. And the people who said that didn't happen include Donald Trump's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, his acting Attorney General, Jeffrey Rosen, his own cyber, security, election security chief, Chris Krebs. I mean, Mike Pence said, he didn't say that there was a fraud to overturn the election. So I think that trying to get into Trump's head, of course, is probably a fraught game, but it is still one of the most fascinating questions out there. So Matt, Linda Williamson says, I'm very active in my local legislative district in Maricopa County. I'm very concerned in regard to laws being passed at the state level, which take a lot of the oversight away from our Secretary of State. I'm concerned about the midterms. How would you recommend the best way to advocate for fair elections in 2022 and 2024?
Oh gosh, that's a complex question. Particularly, Maricopa County in Arizona, it's very contentious, and every state is different. So advice for one state might be different from the others. But I think in general, broadly across the US, the more involved people are, even down at sort of local level, whether it's observing polls or helping count votes, opening envelopes, things like that, the more involved you are, the more equipped you are to push back against disinformation and persuade your friends and family of those things. That gives you tools to fight back when you hear these lies come down.
Mark, Mike Liverwright asks, did you investigate the other side, for example, voter discouragement and suppression?
No, I mean, I didn't come across too many instances of voter discouragement. I did interview people who are running elections in the 6 swing states, and we had researchers who were interviewing them, and that really never came up. The pressure came after the votes were collected, and so there was a great deal of pressure put on the people who were counting the ballots, with demonstrators banging on the windows and calling for them to be tried for treason and all other kinds of nonsense. And it came with the kind of pressure that was put on Ruby Freeman and other election workers. But all that happened really after the election. I didn't come across, I don't know, Matt, maybe you could answer this too, and many instances of people being discouraged from voting.
No, it's actually worth pointing out the opposite, is that in a season of plague and illness and bureaucracy and delay, this was a really well-run election for the most part. You really
more
didn't
people
hear
voted
this,
than any time in American history, didn't they? More people.
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
really didn't hear of suppression or things like that. The lines weren't particularly long in general. It seemed to be a smooth election.
Anne Marie Blaney asks, writes, it seems that the only media reports of voter fraud that I've seen recently involve low-level fraud on the part of Trump voters. Mark, do you think is that what you found as well, or is it so minuscule it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, I mean, things are so minuscule, and probably will even out. I mean, if you look back at, you can go on the Heritage Foundation's website. They've been tracking voting fraud incidents over the last 50 years. And what you find is that they're all very small. In relatively few cases, is there even enough votes to switch like a school board election? But they are fairly well distributed between Republicans and Democrats.
I think one thing people haven't really focused on is how unclose this election was in a lot of ways by comparison to, for instance, 2000, right? Like the 2000 election is the one example a lot of people come back to because of Florida. Florida, it was one state. It was literally a few hundred votes. 537 was the final count of difference between Bush and Gore. And even the media sponsored recounts that were done over the next few months after the Supreme Court ended the official recounts found the result was the same, basically. Here we're talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands, being required to change in at least 3 states in order to change the outcome. And I think that you guys know this better than I do. I think the AP had a study that they went to look at those 6 states and found only 400 or 450 votes that they could even describe as being suspect, far less than that would make a difference, as you say, even a dog catcher race in one of these big places.
And you know, I made the point earlier that voting patterns in this country are so well established. That's why we have 6 swing states. We have 6 swing states because those are the only places where we're not sure, you know, how the election is going to go. But the reason that networks can call elections sometimes before the election, before the polling places are even closed, the reason that state legislators are able to draw these crazy gerrymanders maps is because we know exactly where, you know, Republican votes are and Democrats are within a fairly clear, you know, margin of error. And so any, you know, major fraud would make that map, you know, glare with, you know, a red flag, you know, something out of whack here. And I think it was your paper, the New York Times, surveyed every election official in every state, asking if there were any red flags in their states, and the answer was no.
Right. So Dora Shui asks, did you talk with any of the people from the, I'm going to mispronounce it, Diebold voting machine company about the claims of the machines being programmed to give false counts and Diebold's lawsuit against some of the instigators? Matt, was that something you ended up spending any time on, or?
I think Dominion is the
That's what I was thinking, yeah, but I'm not, Dominion, obviously, we've heard obviously all about them and their lawsuits against Fox and some of the conspiracy theories.
I suspect that's the company in question. No, I didn't talk to them. I quoted them at one point, a letter that their lawyers had written, but really there was zero evidence of any of that. The only place where there was even really a momentary question was in Antrim County, Michigan, that we've mentioned already. And what happened was Cheryl Guy, a county clerk there, who, as she says, she's not a techie person. She's been county clerk a long time. And she, on election night, was working with the new equipment and new system from Dominion. And she accidentally shifted about 3,000 votes from the Trump column to the Biden column, one of which was likely hers because she herself voted for Trump. She realized within a few hours the mistake she had made and came forward and said, whoa, something has happened. I've made a mistake, these 3,000 votes. And immediately it shot to Washington, to New York, to around the world, as Mark mentioned. And sort of there were private jets arriving in the night and teams descending on her office to take apart her equipment and all these sorts of things, turned her life upside down.
Trying to convince her to change her story, to say, no, it wasn't my mistake. The machine
apologized. And she suffered enormously for that, for telling the truth about her own mistake. But I bring that up to say that were it true that Dominion machines were switching votes or things like that, it would be immediately apparent, because here we have the example of 3,000 votes briefly in the wrong column. Everybody knew it. So if there was anything on the scale that Trump alleges, which is hundreds of thousands or even millions of fraudulent votes, it would be undisguisable. It would be immediately apparent.
Right. And the irony of that story is that the one place we know of where somebody changed votes from one candidate to another was from Biden to Trump. He benefited from that. And of course, you didn't hear the Biden people say that that was somehow illicit, because they understood that that was, that was an accurate, correction of an honest mistake. And they could have done the other way around. Imagine had been the other way around. Imagine had it been 3,000 votes taken away from Trump and given to Biden, saying, "Oh, sorry, we meant to give them to Biden all along. They were supposed to be Biden's." What would the Trump camp have said about that? So it's a remarkable story there. Mark Marilyn Klingler asks, regarding theories of election heist that were irrational, why do intelligent people believe them if they are so outrageous? How is the intelligent, respected people buy into this kind of irrationality?
Well, there are plenty of intelligent people, Peter, who I think have what scientists refer to as confirmation bias, where you look at an experiment and you are hoping for a certain outcome, and so you see what you want to see. And I think we have plenty of examples of that in the book, where I think perfectly honest, reasonably intelligent people went to the polls or to the counting places expecting to find fraud. And what did they find? They found what they thought were examples of fraud, and they believed it. I don't think that many people who were actually familiar with the way voting happens in America, who have ever been part of a voting count, would honestly say that there's some way that we could somehow switch millions of votes. But I think that the people who are making the allegations believe them because of this confirmation bias. And I think other people believe them because they want to believe them. I mean, I don't think most people, frankly, Peter, make up their minds about things on the basis of a calm, weighing of the facts. Most people make their opinions on the basis of how they feel, how the people they associate with feel. And so they believe pretty much what they want to believe.
Well, I think that's right. I think there's also, of course, there's a tendency to believe the people that you believe are your people, right? Your tribe, your side of whatever debate it must be. And if they say it's happening, it must be happening, right? Because, we don't trust the other side. Matt Scott Albert asks, what's the status of the Pennsylvania audit? He's from Lancaster County.
I don't know. Mark is more up on the Pennsylvania stuff.
Well, that makes sense.
Mark,
yeah.
As of right now, it's not happening. The legislature, to my knowledge, in Pennsylvania has not authorized what they call now a forensic recount. I know that one of the legislators went out on his own to try to conduct one, and he's actually gotten himself in a whole lot of trouble because now he's been sued by one of the counties because he went in and examined their machines, thereby making the machines useless for future elections because they've been compromised. So he's been sued. But to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing coming on that.
Dora Shui, by the way, lets us know that, yes, I meant Dominion. Thank you for emphasizing the absurdity of rigged machines. So we have that correction. What is this here? Sorry, this is a very important question that I should have asked myself, but Lisa Laszlo wants to know, did Mark and Matthew coordinate their shirts on purpose?
Yes, we did. Every day, even when we're not on camera.
This is the official uniform of the Steele book tour. I didn't get the memo.
This is what journalists, Peter, are supposed to be wearing when they're working from home. Get with the program.
Yeah, I've messed this up. I've messed this up entirely. Well, we're gonna wrap up in a few minutes. For those who haven't yet, please do go to the chat function. You'll see links to various bookstores to buy this book. If you don't see a link to your bookstore, they can mail it to you from one of these, or you can go to whatever bookstore you prefer in your own city. The book, of course, is The Steele, the attempt to overturn the 2020 election and the people who stopped it. And again, it's a focus not on Trump per se, but on the people out in the real parts of the country who were at the center of this extraordinary storm and put their own, put themselves on the line to do what they felt was the right thing. It's an extraordinary book. So I want to see if Mark and Matt want to say anything to wrap up our session here, which has been great. Matt, you want to start? I think you want to. What did we miss? What questions did I forget to ask?
I can't think of any. It's a very, very thorough questioning. I think the only thing I would just encourage people, if you read the book, or if you don't read the book, is to get involved. I really believe in that, having come through the process of researching and writing. Is that the difference between people who fell for propaganda and the people who stood up against it was their involvement in the process. It doesn't have to be in Washington, D.C. in some federal building. It can be at your local library where they're holding, polling or whatever it is. I would just encourage people to get involved.
So Matt says it doesn't matter if you read it, but it does matter if you buy it. So do buy the book at the very least.
Yes,
Mark, you have anything else you want to?
Both.
Mark, you want to add anything to that?
Going off what Matt said, I mean, we don't run elections in this country out of a big federal building in Washington. Elections are run by your neighbors and my neighbors in every county and every state all across the country. And I think that's, to me, a tremendous strength of our system. It makes it cumbersome. It makes it clumsy. Sometimes, the rules and regulations are different. People get confused. But in the end, it would be virtually impossible, in my opinion, to get all of these folks from all over America to somehow collaborate on some massive fraud. It's just utterly preposterous to think so.
All right, well, great. On that note, we're gonna leave you for this evening. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Brittany, I think. But this has been a fantastic discussion. Go buy the book. It's an important book. Tell your friends and neighbors about it, because it is, as Mark said, about your own communities, our own communities here across America. So thank you very much, Mark and Matt. Appreciate you letting me join you for this fun discussion.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you guys, all three of you, for being here. And thank you to everyone who tuned in on this Sunday. Like Peter said, the links for the book at all of the 7 participating independent bookstores are in the chat, but you can also just go to our websites and search The Steal and you will find it. Thank you to all the amazing independent bookstores who joined forces with us: Midtown Scholar, Literati, Acapella Books, Changing Hands, Books and Books, Harvard Bookstore, Politics and Prose. I think I got them all. Please support your local independent bookstore. It is more important now than ever before. But again, thank everyone for being here, and I hope everyone can stay well and stay well read, and we will see you next time.